Coming up on Network Africa, top official at Kenya's Electoral Commission, Ezra Chiloba, goes on vacation and will not take part in running next week's rerun election. Uganda's main opposition leader, Kizza Besigye, arrested over murder. And Egypt releases Irish prisoner Ibrahim Halawa after 4 years in jail. Hello and welcome to Network Africa. I'm Millicent Walker. Let's start in Kenya, where a second electoral official is boycotting next week's rerun election. The chief executive of the election board has taken a leave for 3 weeks. Mr. Ezra Chiloba says he took a personal decision to be away in order to build confidence in stakeholders who had complained about the commission's officials. Mr. Chiloba had been the center of a storm for months, with opposition politicians alleging that he is working with the governing Jubilee Party, blaming him for bungling the August election. However, Mr. Chiloba has refused to bow to calls to leave the commission, saying the Supreme Court did not find any of the electoral officials culpable. This comes after Rosalina Kombe denounced her resignation, fleeing the country, citing threats to her life. And amid the political tension and drama, Kenyan citizens are celebrating National Heroes Day. It is a public holiday in the country, with many citizens where they troop out in their numbers to commemorate its 53rd year. President Kenyatta led the nation in marking the day, locally called the Mansuja Day, at the Uhuru Park in the capital, Nairobi. On this day, Kenyans celebrate their heroes who fought for their independence from Britain, but has since been expanded to recognize individuals who have made outstanding contributions to the country in various fields, including sports, medicine, education, and many others. And in the meantime, President Uhuru Kenyatta has assured Kenyans of his administration's readiness to counter any threats to national security as the country prepares for the rerun of the presidential elections next Thursday. Mr. Kenyatta was speaking at the Heroes Day celebrations, where he said he would not allow a repeat of the painful past where lives and property had been lost. After elections in December 2007, more than 1,500 people were killed in post-poll and ethnically driven violence. While still staying in Kenya, opposition leader Raila Odinga has been attending funeral services of people allegedly killed by police during demonstrations calling for reforms before new elections hold. Mr. Odinga withdrew from next week's presidential rerun election, saying that it will not be credible, calling on his supporters to demonstrate nationwide rather than vote next Thursday. His supporters have reportedly been attacking Electoral Commission officials to prevent them from preparing for the election. All eyes will be on Kenya, watching how next week's rerun election will pan out. Well, let's go over to Zimbabwe now, where the country's High Court has ruled that when a person dies, they must leave the bulk of their estate and their will to their immediate family. The country's state-run newspaper says the landmark case was brought by a widow in Matare who had been excluded from her late husband's will, which also disinherited his 2 children. Justice Lois Matanda Moyo said that the widow, Lilian Nyumushanya, should be the sole beneficiary of the matrimonial home, and the children should benefit from the estate. According to the newspaper, she said that traditions and cultural practices that infringe on the rights of women conferred by the Constitution were void. When a man dies, his family often takes his property, leaving his widow destitute. This often affects women in customary marriages or when their spouses die without a will. Police authorities in Uganda say the main opposition leader has been arrested and charged with murder after they broke up a rally organized to protest moves to extend President Yoweri Museveni's rule. Kizza Besigye of the Forum for Democratic Change, the FDC party, who contested and lost 4 elections against longtime leader Museveni, was blamed for the deaths of 2 protesters during Wednesday's rally. But Wednesday's clash in Rukungiri near the Rwandan border was one of several violent anti-Museveni protests that have spread across Uganda since the president last week, for the first time, openly expressed support for the proposed legislation aimed at allowing him stay in power. Ireland's Foreign Minister Simone Coveney says that the Egyptian authorities have released an Irish citizen that was arrested in 2013. Ibrahim Halawa was picked up by security officials during a siege at the Al-Faf Mosque in the capital Cairo in 2013. Halawa, who was 17 at the time of his arrest, was accused with nearly 500 others of inciting violence, riots and sabotage. He was acquitted of all charges more than a month ago, but his release was delayed. And at least 3 people have been killed after rebel groups in South Sudan clashed in a strategic area near the Ugandan border. The clashes broke between 2 groups, one loyal to former Army General Thomas Cirillo and one loyal to former Vice President Riek Machar in Kajo Keji, a key conduit for rebels moving east and west and an entry point for supplies from Uganda. South Sudan's civil war, triggered by a feud between President Salva Kiir and his former deputy, has plunged parts of the world's youngest nation into famine and forced a third of the population, about 4 million people, to flee their homes. Well, for the very latest on the rebel group crashes in South Sudan, in the studio joining us now is an international affairs analyst, Dr. Okwe Opala, and he joins us on the program. Welcome to Network Africa.
Thank you so much.
All right, so let's start. South Sudan, the world's youngest country, has received more than $1 billion humanitarian aid from the United States as well as the United Nations. And, you know, violence there has refused to abate. I mean, only this week we heard about clashes between rebel groups. Why do you think that these things are happening?
Well, that's the unfortunate story of African nations. Often we fight for freedom, we struggle for independence, we struggle to rule ourselves, but at the end of the day, when it appears we have gotten what we want, then we turn against each other. The lack of leadership, lack of the spirit of sacrifice. You see, if we remember that South Sudan conflict, or rather the Sudan, the move to have an independent South Sudan took almost 1.5 million lives between 1983 to 2011, when eventually the independence was achieved. Initially under the leadership of John Garang, before eventually he died, and then ceded leadership to the current set of people.